Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. Please use the Q&A function to submit your questions, and we'll address as many as we can. My name is Isabella Javidan. I'm NIAC's Communication Manager, and I'll be moderating this discussion. I want to start briefly with who we are and why we're here. The National Iranian American Council is the largest anti-war, pro-peace Iranian American organization in the country, with 65,000 members, including 5,000 who joined just this summer in the midst of the war with Iran. We have over 14 chapters across the country, over 10,000 activists, and hundreds of volunteers. Our past successes include working on the JCPOA, the Muslim ban during Trump's last administration, and now advocating against war and protecting the civil rights of Iranian Americans. We pursue these goals by educating policymakers, mobilizing our community, and building political power so that Iranian American voices are heard where decisions are made. This mission is especially urgent right now, today. The June war marked one of the most dangerous moments in recent US-Iran relations. And today, the imminent snapback of UN Security Council sanctions by the E3 threatens to trigger further escalation. Absent diplomacy, the risk of renewed conflict remains quite high at the moment. And furthermore, to establish a clear baseline, before the war, NIAC partnered with YouGov to conduct the most rigorous national survey of Iranian Americans to date, fielded in May and June 2025, alongside a comparative US sample. These findings offered empirical insight into how the community most directly impacted views, questions of war, of peace, and diplomacy at this critical juncture. And now to introduce our speakers, we have Jamal Abdi, who's our first speaker, president of the National Iranian American Council. Jamal has led NIAC since 2018 after serving as our policy director and working on Capitol Hill as one of the few Iranian Americans advising on foreign policy and national security. Jamal will frame the stakes of this moment, the snapback deadline, the fallout from the June war, and the real risks of renewed conflict, as well as how these issues impact Iranian Americans through policies like the travel ban and ICE arrests. Next, we'll turn to Dr. Kevan Harris, Associate Professor of Sociology at UCLA and author of A Social Revolution, Politics and the Welfare State in Iran. Dr. Harris is the lead researcher for the Iranian Diaspora Dashboard and the Iran Social Survey, one of the most comprehensive studies of Iranian society. Today, he'll walk us through the key findings of the NIAC YouGov poll conducted this past May and June. And then finally, we'll hear from Ryan Costello, NIAC's policy director. Ryan's been with NIAC for over a decade, leading our policy team in its efforts to influence lawmakers, track legislation, and coordinate advocacy. He'll share what these poll results mean for US policymakers and how they should inform decisions at this critical moment. After Ryan's remarks, we'll move straight to the Q&A. Again, please type your questions into the Q&A function in Zoom, and we'll take as many as time allows. So I'll go ahead and hand it over to Jamal to start us off.
Thank you, Bella. Thanks, folks, for joining us. So today we're going to talk about this survey that we fielded and why we think it's important to understanding the political dynamics of the standoff between the West and Israel and Iran. In particular, how the players involved on all sides of this have sought to move public opinion and empower and disempower various political actors, civil society, and the public, including the Iranian diaspora and the Iranian American community, in order to advance their own objectives. This is a standoff that I firmly believe is not one that primarily hinges on the substance. The nuclear issue is not a challenge of rocket science or nuclear physics. It is a political challenge. And so I hope that through this call and through this survey that we're sharing, we can help inform a better understanding of where we are today and where things may go forward based on that political challenge and the political battles that have ensued. So today, the European Union and at the UN Security Council is now taking the final steps to execute Snapback. This move will impose largely a series of symbolic actions and symbolic sanctions that are effectively already in place. But this action is not symbolic. It carries real risks of sparking an Iranian response, including further reductions of any chance for the international community to actually have eyes on Iran's nuclear program, uh, and triggering a chain reaction of escalation that can lead to another military conflict. We fear that this snapback action creates a flashpoint for escalation that certain actors who want to continue the June war and make it into something longer and more sustained are eager to seize upon. We oppose the snapback because it turns up the temperature at exactly the wrong moment. We should be focused right now on de-escalation, getting back to the negotiating table, averting another war. This is an action that's being triggered not 3 months after a illegal war was launched, at a time when the Iranians are still figuring out how to recover from that war, what comes next for the nuclear program, and the negotiations that got knocked off kilter because of that war. And it comes at a time when Israel is seeking to relaunch that war and draw in the United States and likely Europe and other actors who are involved in the snapback effort. We oppose this because it is not a means of actually utilizing leverage for a diplomatic solution, but rather to exhaust that leverage, to turn that leverage in and sort of clear the deck to get on with what comes after diplomacy has failed. And frankly, the snapback is an acknowledgement of European fecklessness and of the kabuki theater of Europe trying to negotiate a deal with Iran, supposedly, when they have failed to demonstrate that they are relevant players who can actually offer Iran anything in lieu of the United States being involved. I think nobody involved in this snapback effort truly believes that Iran would give concessions to Europe without the US in the room. And so what we see the E3 doing is using all of its sticks on the weaker party, Iran, rather than pushing the stronger party, the United States, that can actually decide whether or not there is a deal. So we oppose this because we know what has succeeded and what has failed in addressing Iran's nuclear program, and what has succeeded in creating a pathway to address not just US and international concerns regarding Iran, regarding its nuclear program, regarding other aspects, but also the concerns that Iranian Americans themselves have, the desire for a brighter future for our loved ones inside of Iran, who have suffered from political and social repression from within, from their own government, and under bombs and sanctions from without. Um, and that is diplomacy. That is what has actually worked. More sanctions have not worked. Bombing did not work. The only thing that worked was securing a diplomatic agreement. And that deal was undone. We had a deal. It was undone not because it failed. It was undone because Netanyahu and political figures, not security figures in Israel, opposed it because powerful lobbies, including AIPAC, uh, fought to dismantle it, fought to block the deal, fought to dismantle it, fought to make it a partisan issue, and ultimately because Netanyahu convinced Donald Trump to tear up the deal. Um, so what we now are faced with is this decision point between a final diplomatic off-ramp or diving full bore into conflict. And what is especially pertinent today with this survey that we are sharing is just how much of uh, this path towards conflict or wherever this goes has been has involved what Netanyahu calls the other war, information warfare. So as Iranian Americans, as a civic organization that is involved in this space, we have seen firsthand this surge in information warfare to shrink political space, bolster certain actors. And this has been reported to some extent, if not had the dots connected. There have been reports, but nobody has really tied this together. We've seen reporting on Israeli foreign influence campaigns targeting U.S. lawmakers just last year. And we called for an investigation into this, and the Biden administration ignored it. We saw just a couple of weeks ago, Haaretz exposed that Israel's former intelligence minister, now technology minister, was involved in a online foreign influence operation, utilizing bots and sock puppet accounts to boost regime change narratives and to promote the son of the deposed Shah as an opposition leader. Um, we have seen a lot of these campaigns, and they are so effective in crafting the narrative that they actually ended up self-propagandizing the purveyors of the campaigns. Netanyahu in June launched this war and essentially named it after regime change. Rising Lion. He borrowed the symbols of pre-Islamic Iran. Some would say borrowed symbols of the monarchy in the name of the operation itself, and he extolled Iranians as the bombs were falling to take to the streets to topple the regime. Uh, we know that is not what happened. He provoked a backlash. However much Iranians oppose the Islamic Republic and want it gone and are disillusioned with their rulers, they largely united against the foreign invader. As much as they don't love the Islamic Republic, they don't love being bombed. Um, but this information campaign has been especially aggressive in targeting Iranians and the diaspora and Iranian Americans. So one of the largest broadcast channels, media networks, Iran International, for example, was launched with $250 million from the Saudi royal family. And it takes an annual write down of something like $140 million and has obfuscated where those funds actually come from. We don't know, but all sources point to, um, you know, uh, foreign states standing up this network as a means, as a tool for promoting externally led war and regime change on Iran. Um, and so at the same time, this is not just, those actors, it's inside of Iran, hardline factions inside of Iran have run their own influence campaigns. They have accused factions inside of Iran who favor diplomacy of secretly working with outside groups like ours and supporters of diplomacy who they claim, we are the CIA or we are the Mossad. And that charge is then used politically inside of Iran to attack pro-engagement factions. And it's simultaneously adopted outside of Iran by certain opposition groups and certain lobbies to attack pro-diplomacy advocates. And what all this has done is, I mean, especially for Iranian Americans, but writ large, has poisoned the discourse. So in 2022, we saw, amidst the Women Life Freedom movement, after the killing of Mahsa Amini, we saw a massive online smear campaign against supporters of diplomacy within the Iranian American community, within the Iranian diaspora. And this also has been reported, but the dots have not been connected. But there are examples, Iranian American women elected officials who were harassed, women like Daria Farivar, legislator in Washington State, who needed police protection and security because of death threats and threats to her safety, because they claimed that because she had supported the nuclear deal or because she worked with us, that she was somehow connected to the odious officials who were repressing and cracking down on ordinary Iranians. And those attacks in turn were then amplified by outlets like Iran International, and as has been reported in Politico and as a report that we commissioned from an online forensics expert has laid out, there was clear evidence of artificial amplification, sock puppets, bots, other things to amplify these attacks and create this phenomenon to effectively silence, voices in the community who are not supportive of the Islamic Republic, but are not supportive of war and believe that diplomacy is the way to actually square the circle. The goal was to create this false dichotomy, which is you're either with us or you're with the regime. And the result was intimidation. The result was that, groups like ours, we had our donors were threatened. People were forced to go private because they didn't want to get attacked. And so all of that is to say that this is part of the reason why we decided for so many years, people have been saying what Iranians in the diaspora, what Iranian Americans believe, as if we're some sort of monolith, and have used that to frame the debate and push for things like snapback, like war, like sanctions. And so we decided, why don't we actually ask Iranian Americans what they believe? Why don't we actually field a scientific data-based survey to determine that? And so, actually, before the war in June, in late May, we commissioned a poll with YouGov. We partnered with them to field a survey that measured where Iranian Americans actually stand on the key issues of U.S. policy that are under so much contestation. And so we're going to lay out the results of this survey today, but the results I think you'll see are pretty clear. Yes, some in our community do oppose diplomacy. Some do want war, but overwhelmingly, Iranian Americans say they support diplomacy as the best approach, not war, not sanctions, and as the best approach to not just the nuclear issue, but also to regional security and the best approach to address human rights. So this is very different than the narrative that has been constructed, and frankly, the narrative that is often reported. So in closing, I'm proud to say that we have added thousands of members just in the immediate aftermath of the war. As Iranian Americans saw what was happening, we added over 5,000 new members to the organization. There is a renewed sense that we need to be vigilant to prevent the U.S. being drawn into the war and Iranians dying in the war. And so I hope that the survey helps inform some of that. I'm pleased to be joined by Kevan and my colleague Ryan, who will lay out where, based on the actual data, our community stands and hopefully what that means for U.S. policy on Iran going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamal. And with that, we'll head on over to Dr. Harris to go over the poll findings.
Good morning from Los Angeles. Thanks to NIAC and everybody who's watching and joining in. My name is Kevan Harris. I'm a professor in the sociology department at UCLA, and I'm an Iranian American, and I have been studying Iran for a long time and became interested in the Iranian American diaspora, which I belong to also several years ago. And so we've been looking at the demographics of Iranian Americans here at UCLA for a while. And it was in this connection that NIAC and I helped to design this survey, which asked in many ways, what my friend Arash's easy title his book, What Iranians Want. But given that there are, according to the Census Department, around 600,000 Iranian Americans in the United States, that can't be one single thing. And 600,000 is both a lot, but it's also not a lot. So measuring the public opinion of, let's say, a large migrant group in the United States, but unevenly dispersed, not recorded necessarily on the census yet, is not very easy. And the methods to do so, specifically for Iranian Americans, up to this recent poll, have been using quite older methods, based on maybe like a list of last names in a phone book, or the dreaded Facebook or Twitter polls, which are non-representative, intended to basically collect the views of people already in a social network that are predisposed to agree with one side or another. So this poll uses basically best practices that exist as of 2025 to try to measure a variety of important questions on public opinion and from Iranian Americans. And then I can go more into the methods if anybody's interested, but basically it combines different ways of contacting Iranian Americans randomly through a very long and large list of likely Iranian Americans in the United States. So the best types of polls are attempting to come up with a random sample that any person from a population has an equal chance of being asked. And this poll gets pretty close to that, with the exception that I think non-citizen Iranians in the United States who are not citizens or residents, they might not be as represented in the poll. But otherwise, the demographics of this poll look very similar to what we know about the demographics of Iranians in the United States. So within the margin of error, we can be relatively confident that most of what we found is accurate. And at least it adds a data point for when we hear in the news or we read in the press that Iranians want X or all Iranians want Y. Of course, that phrase should be questioned when it says about anything. We know that we have a large country, highly polarized in some ways. So I think this poll is actually very, very useful. And in fact, in many ways, it looks like what polling has found out about other migrant groups as well. So let's go to the first slide. And I think it's cutting off the top here. Can you shrink at least on my end? This is basically party affiliation. Okay, there we go. Great. Yeah. So this is party affiliation among Iranian Americans. And we can see here that there's a pretty wide distribution of partisanship among Iranian Americans in the United States. We certainly have strong Republicans among Iranian Americans. I know some of them here in Los Angeles, over in Beverly Hills. There's obviously independents, like a lot of Americans, they're independent. Yet, if you look at totals, most Iranian Americans, a plurality, identify as Democrat or lean Democrat. That's not only interesting about Iranian Americans, because one hears a variety of things about the political leanings of Iranians in the United States. But, if we take a step back and we think about Iranians as one of the top 20 migrant groups in the United States, including along with many other migrant groups from Asia more broadly. So Iran's in Central Asia. We also have many migrant groups, including in California, from China, Korea, Philippines, Taiwan, Vietnam, etc. And we know a lot more about those groups in terms of partisanship than Iranians, actually, thanks to a lot of work by organizations like Pew. And if you look at the partisan breakdown of Chinese Americans, Korean Americans, etc., they're all kind of look like this. They look very similar to what we're looking at here for Iranian Americans. Which, when I see that, as a sociologist, it kind of rings truer. There's a bit of ground truth here that we can say that this kind of makes sense. This distribution of partisanship. In that sense, Iranians are not exceptional as Americans. They're both Americans and Iranians. And in that sense, other migrant groups exhibit similar partisan leanings. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. And this is basically asking respondents who they voted for in the election last year. This poll was done in May. So, Trump's ratings were not as low as they are now. So hopefully people were responding somewhat truthfully. That being said, you can take a look at the distribution of who people voted for. And, basically we have a higher number who voted for Kamala Harris as opposed to Trump, although no denying that Donald Trump had many supporters in the Iranian American community, but at least according to the poll, not the majority. And so, because partisanship doesn't last forever, but if we had to make a claim about who most Iranians voted for, this is the only data point we have for the last election. Okay, let's go next. Now that we know the partisanship, let's take a little bit about views. Can we now you can shrink this slide a bit because it's being cut off on the on the left. So a variety of opinion questions are asked among Iranian Americans, and we worked very hard to try to make the wording of these questions neutral, because if, as someone who does a lot of polls myself, including I've done polling inside of Iran, if you make the question look like it's leaning one way or another, you can also, influence the answers themselves. So this is, I still can't see the whole title, by the way, at least on my end. This is what Iranian Americans would they oppose or support military action against Iran? Remember, this poll was taken before the 12-day war this summer, and so we can see that, while we have, let's go back one. Well, here we go. Okay, here we go. Well, we can see that so 36% of respondents said they would support military action against Iran. 53% said they would not. Of course, at that time we didn't, many people didn't know what military action would look like. This was kind of a general question, but it is interesting to see that a majority opposed. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, it seems like everybody can see it. Great. Maybe it's on my end. Okay, awesome. So the second question would be, what percent do you support or oppose negotiating a new nuclear agreement with Iran? This, of course, this question was asked at a time, as you remember, in which the United States was engaged in a series of diplomatic meetings with Iran, direct and indirect talks. So it was in the news. It's not necessarily a partisan question, because the Trump administration itself had been, actively claiming that it was at least engaged in the negotiations track with Iran. So we can see here 62% of Iranian Americans in the poll said that they would support negotiating a new nuclear agreement, and a much smaller percentage would oppose. Okay, next. All right, and then this question basically gives respondents they can choose from one or more multiple options. So it's a kind of a menu question. And the question would be, what's the best way to prevent Iran from securing nuclear weapons, including that the US shouldn't even pursue this goal? So the respondents selected from any or all of these options. Most the respondents selected diplomatic negotiations. Smaller number selected war and sanctions as well. Go to the next one. Similarly, beyond the nuclear file, there's a broader question asked at the poll about what's the best way to address regional security concerns related to Iran. Could be concerns related to many different definitions of security, but we keep questions vague on purpose sometimes, just to elicit responses from respondents. So the distribution is the same. Most of the respondents selected diplomatic negotiations, and far less percentage selected war or sanctions. Let's go next. Okay, and then this last question is one of several in the poll, and I encourage people who are interested to look for themselves on NIAC's website, which have the results. We asked a variety of questions related to domestic policy, both related to Iranian Americans inside of the United States, as well as policy related to Iranians outside of the United States. And this is a question that essentially asks, would you support or oppose a travel ban halting visas to Iranians, citing security concerns? And one of the most interesting things about this poll is that, along with polling Iranian Americans in a relatively representative way, NIAC also ran a poll at the same time with YouGov, drawing from YouGov's huge panel of Americans in general, and asked most of the same questions to the general population. So we can compare the results at the same time, same question, to the general population of Americans, representative of American adults, compared to Iranian Americans. So it's actually a pretty interesting idea, because we can see where do Iranians fall on some of these issues compared to general population who, in some cases, might not even be as informed about some of these questions. You can actually see that here. General population is less sure what this question really means, because probably most people didn't remember this happening the last time, but Iranian Americans certainly do. So we can see there's a high degree of opposition towards a new travel ban, halting visas to Iranians coming to the United States from outside, whereas the general population, actually you can see a degree of support, for basically kind of I would say nativism is what this kind of looks like to me. But we can see that at least on the Iranian American side, strong opposition in the poll towards basically banning Iranians from coming to the country. As we know, Iran is on a list of many countries. I think a few were added just recently about making it very difficult for individuals from those countries to visit Iran as someone who, the United States, as someone in the educational system in the United States. These measures are shotgun measures that make it very difficult for students, including students from Iran, to come to the United States, get degrees, and of course, it's kind of also soft diplomacy on our end. When Iranians come here, they tend to, end up changing their lives, and some of them go back, of course. So okay, I think that's the last slide on that. So let me just wrap up by saying that more polls are better than less polls, but better polls are better than bad polls, and sometimes bad polls can give us misleading information, especially when people use polls to speak in the name of a large community of Americans, like Iranian Americans. So I think that this initiative by NIAC was really important, and just as like a sociologist interested in these topics, I think that what they did was very important, and I applaud them because the poll and the questions of the poll are neutral questions. They're not really written like many polls are in push polling and in political consultant polling. The questions of this poll are not written in a way to shift the respondents to answer in one direction or another. And so actually NIAC is quite honest in the results of these polls. I mean, in that a percentage of Iranian Americans are on the other side of the political spectrum. But when one hears that side represents all Iranian Americans, and even the more extreme versions of that side speak in that way, I think something like this at least gives us evidence to say, wait a minute. First of all, that doesn't make sense. No huge group would have such a monolithic viewpoint. But second, that if we really want to say what do the majority or at least plurality of Iranian Americans want in terms of the key issues on foreign policy and domestic policy today, now we have evidence at least that we could say that. And I think that this is a super important initiative for NIAC, and I would imagine that NIAC and hopefully other organizations continue these types of things over time so that these methods are refined and that additional data points can be added, given that just think how much has happened since May and June, both vis-a-vis Iran and the United States, as well as inside of the United States, that affects Iranian Americans. So if you ask some of these questions today or additional questions, I'd be very curious to find out the answer. So I'll turn it over to Ryan.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Kevan. Yes, next we'll hear from NIAC's Policy Director, Ryan Costello.
All right. Thanks, Bella. Thank you, Kevan. Thank you, Jamal, and all of you for joining. This poll has been a labor of love and bringing it to fruition and working through all the issues, kind of internally and with YouGov, and we're happy to get it in the field at what turned out to be a really critical moment, not just with the war breaking out, I think about the same day that we actually got the results, but the travel ban being implemented while they were gathering the results. So there's been a lot happening, on U.S. relations toward Iran and with the Iranian American community in the United States. So we're happy to get this kind of pulse check of the community and see where they lined up on a lot of these issues. And we're hopeful that we might be able to do that again and see how things may have changed. But Obviously, one of the things you've heard here is there's a diversity of opinion within the Iranian American community on all these kind of contentious policy issues. I think one thing that the poll drove home for me is that many of the policies pursued by the US government don't really seem to reflect what most Iranian Americans seem to think is wise, humane, and effective. And that's something across administrations. So we're in a situation today where war with Iran is still a pretty significant risk. We have the snapback being pursued at the UN Security Council today. Iran vowing, to take countermeasures. And you can see a scenario playing out very easily where a number of diplomatic dominoes fall, and the US and Iran and Israel end up back at war. So this 12-day war doesn't end up just 12 days. It's a prelude to a much broader conflict. And, as Kevan went over here, if the US goes back to war with Iran, it is not going to happen with the majority support of the Iranian American community. And, one thing that we have heard from a number of members, both, members before the war and after, is, just all the stories about how people's family members were impacted by that war, loved ones, fleeing Tehran and other cities as bombs were falling, or, terrified for their loved ones who had to stay and, essentially wait out the war as bombs were falling in their neighborhood and so forth. So all of that is very visceral. I think we do want to see how those opinions may have shifted and so forth. And, perhaps people with somewhat opposition to war become strong opposition to war, maybe some people who are somewhat supportive of war become, in the opposition. That's going to take some measurement to figure out. But we know that that was a very big moment, and both the majority of the community before the war and the plurality, 37%, was in strong opposition to war before it broke out. And with Snapback, seeming to come to fruition, we are at this moment where the window for serious diplomacy may be closing. And one of the things that we saw in the poll is that the Iranian American community ranked diplomacy as most effective across a range of issues with respect to Iran. So that's not just diplomacy with the nuclear negotiations, where a majority thought it would be, the best option to addressing Iran's nuclear program. That's also regional security issues. That's also human rights in Iran. So it is seemingly, the Iranian American community's preference as to how the U.S. government approaches those topics, outpacing sanctions, outpacing war. And I think, unfortunately, what we've seen is a U.S. government that's been very heavy on pressure and not as invested in serious diplomacy in recent years in particular. Let's see, some other items that I thought worthy of note here. So obviously the Iranian American community cares a lot about human rights inside of Iran. This is the anniversary of the Woman Life Freedom movement from 2022, where more than 500 Iranians were killed in those protests. And we asked the community essentially, do you think the US government should do more, focus more on human rights in Iran? There's a strong majority that said yes. 62% believes the US government should do more. But what's interesting is that doesn't necessarily correspond with support for pressure policies or militarized approaches toward Iran. So you still have a majority of the community opposing military action against Iran. And then you have a plurality of 43% finding diplomatic negotiations are likely to be most effective in addressing human rights concerns inside of Iran. And that's against 17% for war and 15% for sanctions. We also we're able to measure, opinion on a few civil rights issues. This is something that, again, predates the reimposition of the travel ban, which happened in June, the outbreak of the war, and what we've seen after the war is this kind of wave of ICE enforcement targeting a lot of communities, but there was a specific focus in June on targeting Iranian nationals, and DHS highlighting in Twitter threads and press releases and so forth, their efforts to arrest a range of Iranian nationals, including people who were, out gardening in their front yard and so forth, or, maybe they had some, traffic ticket or something along those lines that raised some complications on the legal front. But a lot of families, kind of across the U.S. and the Iranian American community are dealing with this fear of ICE arrest, or, for a number of people, have someone they know who has been targeted and put into detention and so forth. So before all of this, we had 54% of the community disagreeing with the notion that the U.S. government takes the civil rights of individuals of Iranian heritage seriously, contra 38% that do think the U.S. government takes the civil rights of the community seriously. So obviously something out of whack there. We also had 67% of the community opposing the reinstitution of the travel ban, barring Iranians from securing U.S. visas, contra just 26% in support. So obviously, I think this is a big focus for the organization, in examining how these geopolitical tensions between the U.S. and Iran manifest into civil rights concerns here in the United States. And we're seeing that certainly play out in the months since the war, with travel ban coming into effect, ICE arrests impacting the community. And, that's an issue we are working on, and are interested in continuing to track how opinion within the community may change over time. So those are a few takeaways, and happy to send it back to Bella, I believe.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. So now we'll direct the moment to questions. If anybody has anything they would like to either drop in the Q&A function, or they can raise their hand and ask our panelists some questions. Alrighty. We'll check. Seeing none right now, I'll just go ahead and direct a question over to Dr. Harris. I'm just wondering if there were any findings that surprised you, or issues where Iranian American opinion diverged sharply from U.S. general population.
Yeah, I think the more that and we have students here at UCLA who have taken part in this project to better understand the demographics and social composition of Iranian Americans. So the more that we looked into that, again, and compared it to other groups in the United States, migrants, second generation, the more that I think that the American side of Iranian Americans should be emphasized, in the sense that, not that they're not meaning that in a patriotic sense, although I would believe that many Iranian Americans are patriotic. But what I mean is that, migrants moving to a country, that country that they move to has a major effect on their public opinion, their behavior, right? But also we should understand that even migration itself, when somebody migrates, that's not a random draw from Iran. That particular types of people are more likely to migrate than others and have the resources to do so. So it's a common claim, both among Iranians themselves and among the scholars of Iranian Americans, that Iranian Americans tend to be have high socioeconomic status, meaning that they have high educational attainment, high income, high status. And if you take a look at the best data that we have, that's true to a certain extent. But many Iranians have come to the United States, not just since the Iranian Revolution of 1979, but actually since 2009. There have been multiple waves of Iranian migration to the U.S., not simply the wave that most people think about. It's related to the Iranian Revolution of 1979. So actually, there are many first-generation Iranians, meaning that they themselves have migrated and ended up in the United States from Iran through various different pathways that have come since 2009. In that sense, they're a lot younger than the older Iranian Americans, but they're still first-generation migrants. In fact, in many cases, they're the same age as the sons and daughters of the Iranians who migrated in the 1970s and 1980s. And so they came to the United States in a very different time. They haven't had a long experience as older Iranians have building up income, housing, and socioeconomic status. So actually, one of the interesting things about it is that it really there's actually much more diversity among Iranian Americans in terms of class, even though many of them are also highly educated, but entering into the United States, entering into the labor market in a very different time period has really, I think, led to some differentiation among Iranian Americans, partly based on age and partly based on when they came. So, they're all, of course, everybody in Los Angeles, we all have myths, or I would say images. Myths mean, there's a truth to them, but they don't necessarily represent the whole picture. And where in terms of class, politics, when it comes to Iranian Americans. That's not, and of course, it shouldn't be surprising. So I would say that that's also reflected in the poll. I mean, that's why the poll is very interesting, because if you take a look at it, you can see this diversity, both in terms of demographics, in terms of class, in terms of income, et cetera. We have data on that in the poll. And so you can see that reflected in the poll, which to me is, I think, a much more honest way of looking at Iranian Americans. And then back to the original point I made, that we shouldn't be surprised to find that like the views of Iranian Americans track with the views of other migrant groups when it comes to kind of partisanship, voting preference. Because actually, I think one of the better ways to think about Iranians in the United States and the maybe long wave of them coming to the US is that it's actually a very similar story to other waves of migration from Asia writ large, right? Asia writ large. In fact, sometimes when we say like Middle Eastern migration to the United States, we're actually hiding in the average huge variation. That category that can include people who have migrated from Morocco, from Egypt, from Lebanon, from Saudi Arabia, and from Yemen, okay, as well as from Iran. So I think that the sometimes the averages can hide the variation, and so that's why a poll like this is super important.
Great, thank you. Yeah, we have one other question from an anonymous attendee. Can you elaborate on what you're working on re-ICE arrests? Is that also now a priority for NIAC? So I'll direct that over to Jamal.
So yes, the ICE arrests are a priority. I mean, this is not a new priority per se. We have been actively involved in civil rights issues and issues affecting Iranian Americans and Iranians inside the United States, from the travel ban to single entry visas to banking discrimination. Right now, the ICE arrests and the deportations are probably one of the top issues that we are working on and expending resources on. And that includes both policy advocacy, so working with lawmakers on legislative efforts to try to protect people from being wrongly detained, being not given access to due process, facing deportation. Most recently, we talked to somebody who was the sponsor of an individual who was actually shot in the eye during the Women Life Freedom protests, lost their eye, came here as an asylee. Came here through legal processes, and then was detained by ICE in July, held for over 2 months in detention, and then deported back to Iran, and where this person faces, persecution and, is going to have to deal with some ramifications that they shouldn't have to be dealing with. The United States should not be sending people back to be thrown in jail or to have to deal with a government that literally maimed them. Um, a lot of what we do, other than the sort of the advocacy side of things, is also focused on just casework. So providing informational materials and trainings for both for Iranian Americans and then also people who, whether they are have green cards or are here on visas or who are, undocumented, but have orders to say that they can't be deported back to Iran, to make sure they understand their rights, and that they are not tricked or uh, you know, uh, that they know their rights to be able to protect themselves. But also the casework of, okay, somebody gets picked up, families will contact us. We'll help try to get them in touch with a lawyer, help do advocacy by connecting them with their lawmakers, their representative, their senators, to get advocacy for them there, um, and to help them navigate that process, so that we can, protect innocent people as much as we possibly can. There have been a spike of arrests of Iranians by ICE, at least following the June war. And that correlated with some of the talking points that we were seeing in some circles claiming that there were, potential sleeper cells or that Iran was going to retaliate against the United States. And what we found in action was that the government was then detaining, there's a video of a man driving his young daughter to preschool, being detained by ICE, violently detained, clearly not some threat to the country. But we saw a spike of that. I think there were, at least over 100 arrests just in the week following the war of Iranians. There have been a few success stories. So recently, this past weekend, a man who was detained in Maryland, who had lived here for decades, he was walking his dog one day and was arrested by ICE, and they cited that he had been arrested for possessing marijuana in the 2000s. Um, and so he was detained for months in really awful conditions, moved around. We worked with the family, made sure that they were getting the advocacy they needed, and their lawmakers were very helpful in all of this. And they were released this past weekend. It's Reza Zarab. So, it's a challenging situation because for a lot of people, they don't necessarily see the light at the end of the tunnel. How do you actually stop this policy? What means are there? What mechanisms are there to actually protect people, on a policy level? So a lot of our work ultimately has been about individual cases and just making sure that the information is out there and that individuals have the support they need in our community, and working with other organizations, major civil rights organizations and other community organizations, so that together we can kind of band and protect ordinary people from going through really terrible things.
Great, thank you. And then we just got one other question in. We will direct this one to Ryan. What is your assessment of the political climate for not just immigrant communities, but also minority communities at large at the moment? Free speech protections, the ability to send remittances or donate money to causes back home, even filing paperwork for green cards or citizenship. Have mechanisms changed drastically? Is there anything that makes you hopeful?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think the climate is really difficult right now for immigrant communities across the board. And we're seeing that play out in the Iranian American community and Iranian nationals here in the United States. Based on our work and so forth, ICE arrests of the Iranian community, weren't something that we typically fielded complaints on, and there's been a huge spike in that as part of this broader, effort to detain, 3,000, I believe, foreign nationals per day inside the United States. And the connection to the geopolitical tensions was very concerning, that there's going to be, this risk of war, and, the government is going to come after people within the community on the basis of their heritage. Anytime there's stuff like that, it raises huge red flags. It's possible these arrests have tapered off a little bit of the community and so forth. We've continued to see arrests over the summer, but there was that huge spike. It was very concerning. There's a point on remittances here. I need to state that remittances are actually disallowed between the U.S. and Iran. So that's a sanctions issue. That's a broad thing that's happening. That was one of our recommendations to the Biden administration in the wake of the Women Life Freedom protest movement, is to allow Americans to, be able to send money to their loved ones inside of Iran. Right now, it's just not allowed. There's no real banking connections between the U.S. and Iran. People, if they want to bring their assets over from Iran to the United States, it's extremely difficult. Sometimes banks shutter their accounts and so forth out of, concern of running afoul of sanctions and the lack of kind of proper banking connections and so forth. But that's kind of an issue to the side. The broader climate for immigrant communities is very difficult. Things that give me hope is that, people like Riza Zavar are able to, get help, have people on their side, have organizations like NIAC, they're members of Congress, and then lawyers on their side to work the legal channels, and able to get reunited with their loved ones and so forth. So I think that's been the focus of our work, and will continue to be the focus of our work in this kind of difficult climate vis-a-vis members of the community who are vulnerable.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, so we're up on the hours. As we close, I want to bring us back to the stakes today at a time when policymakers are once again debating sanctions and threats of force. The poll results we talked about this afternoon make one thing clear: Iranian American communities overwhelmingly value diplomacy as the only path that reduces tensions and prevents war. And we are really hoping and working hard to make sure these voices are heard in Washington at this important moment. On behalf of NIAC, I would love to thank Jamal, Dr. Harris, and Ryan for their insights, and thank all of you in the press for taking time to join us today. For any follow-up questions or additional materials, please reach out to the NIAC press team at press@niacouncil.org. Thanks again so much, and we look forward to continuing this important conversation.
Thank you.